Don't let the mainstream media fool you. Doug Ford is as liberal as they come. If you believe the mainstream media, they would have you believing that Doug Ford is the DEI hero fighting back against the woke virus that has overtaken our public school systems, when the reality could not be any further from the truth. That is why we are dubbing Doug Ford Mr. DEI Doug. That is Diverse Equity Inclusion Dougie Ford. Now, what do we mean? Reading from the National Post, Randall Denley writes, Ford got TMU to back off its race-based admissions, but he should go further. The insinuation here is that Doug Ford, he did a good thing, but he's just got to go a little bit further, because it's like, look over here, but definitely don't look over what we're going to cover here later on in this video. Now, I'll read from this article. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has scored a rare victory against the diverse equity and inclusion doctrine that has infested Ontario universities. A source in the Premier's office said that at Ford's request, Toronto Metropolitan University, TMU, has backed down on a plan to reserve 75% of the places in its new medical school for, quote, equity-deserving groups. I agree with that, Doug. That's a good thing. We both agree that schooling or anything in life should be based on merit, based on one's efforts and their abilities. This is an interesting thing that Doug has, I guess, fought for, but look over here, but don't look over here. Now we're going to go through some of the things that Ontario has passed under Doug Ford's alleged leadership. That's right, DEI Doug more than happily supported his share of diverse equity inclusion garbage in the Ontario school system. Reading now from True North News, June 27, 2024. Ontario School Board resource demands teachers believe Canada is founded on white supremacy and racism. Thames Valley District School Board staff training materials for last year's Pride Month were released to the public through a Freedom of Information request obtained by a podcaster and host of the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report podcast, Melanie Bennett. Now, fun fact for the viewers here, I was a student a long time ago in the Thames Valley District School Board, so this one hit a little bit closer home for me. Now, going through the article, the educational resources were prefaced with the statement that the school board does not necessarily endorse the material from external websites that they link to. However, at the same time, the board directs staff to learn from and use resources from those organizations for themselves and in their classrooms. Thames Valley District School Board encouraged staff to use self-assessment tool developed by School Mental Health Ontario to reflect on their own, quote, cultural humility, or an admission of ignorance about other cultures and a willingness to learn from them. It said, cultural humility incorporates, quote, redressing or correcting power dynamics and involving a continuous commitment to, quote, reflection and critique of race, ethnicity, culture, language, sexual orientation, and class. The assessment initially asked school staff to reflect on their own biases, but presented a series of ideological questions as facts that teachers either know or are ignorant of, rather than being a matter of personal belief, the article says. Quote, from this resource that they are giving teachers in Ontario under DEI Doug, quote, I am aware of my privilege. If I am a member of a dominant culture, I understand that I am not without power and privilege, and because of that, I may not be seen as unbiased or as an ally. The training module continued by asking if staff, if they were aware of how Canada's racist and colonialist past allegedly perpetuated white supremacy and institutional racism to the detriment of students. Quote, I am knowledgeable about historical incidents in Canada's past, like the transatlantic slave trade and institutional human rights abuses that demonstrate racism and exclusion towards people who are racialized and marginalized in Canada. The resource then asked teachers to reflect on whether they know that they need to, and here, wait for it, you need to decenter your whiteness so that other cultures can shine. That's right, feel ashamed for being white. Decenter your whiteness. I know that many norms, structures, and values within the education system are rooted in the colonial system, and that to center every student, we need to explicitly decenter whiteness so their cultural strengths can shine. After quizzing staff on their knowledge of Canada's so-called racist culture and their commitment to dismantling it, the report asked staff to assess how well they respect the culture and beliefs of others. It finished by asking if staff understand gender as a spectrum and if they affirm the various gender identities that their students might have. Now, My goodness gracious, it's not enough for us to teach English and math and science, but we have to teach a woke ideology, a political ideology, mind you. And I will touch more on that later. If you do not think this is a political ideology being taught in schools, as school testing scores continue to fall in Ontario, and we're threatened with a strike every few years as soon as contracts come to an end, we have declining school scores, but yet this is being pushed further and further down Canadians' throats by none other than Mr. Conservative, DEI Doug. Now we're going to discuss something that Ontario is pushing called culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, otherwise known as CRRP. Now, this is from the Ontario Teachers Federation, the union representing roughly 160,000 teachers in Ontario. And I'm going to read from Equity Equals Fairness or Equality of Outcomes Food Bank Analogy. So this is an example, a learning module for teachers to be able to teach students in Ontario, because DEI Doug, he's fighting for you so that you're, it would be terrible if we had race-based admissions to university. But let's teach your public school children, let's teach the public school children exactly the things that I claim to be fighting against. I digress. It says recognizing and redistributing power. It is, this is the one that killed me. It is equity and very Canadian to take aside a group that needs help, build them up, and eventually integrate them back into society. Yes, it is very Canadian to give everybody the exact same opportunities if possible, build them up, give them every opportunity possible, but at the end of the day, it falls on that individual, regardless of race, religion, creed, it doesn't matter, gender, etc. It doesn't matter. It falls on that individual to take the strides and work. It is merely the job of the public education system to give an equal playing ground, as it were, to give students the best ability to achieve success in their education. Now, it says we look forward to the day when we look forward to the day when the need for equity and social justice programs are not necessary. Now, I'm here to tell you, little secret, that will never happen because too many people would be out of a job and they wouldn't be able to do little modules like this for the Ontario Teachers Federation and push this kind of thing on your children. But I digress. The purpose of any equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice program is to get rid of itself. Well, thanks for the humor, OTF. It says we cannot seek equity and social justice for Black and other racialized people until we right all the wrongs and seek equity and social justice for our Indigenous brothers and sisters first. So there's nothing good about Canada. We're a systemically racist country. Our colonialist past, we're just pieces of garbage. You should feel ashamed for being white and being a part of this culture. Let's not talk about any positives in Canada's history, how we helped in the Underground Railroad and freeing slaves. Let's not talk about the wider history, as it were, of slavery and how the world was at those times, and arguably how it was Canada and countries like the United States that eventually led out of those things that were culturally norms at that time in the world. But continuing on, giving examples of different things that can be taught or used for demonstrating the CRRP, the culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. They talk about sorting shoes in a circle, sorting books for bias, getting students to critique books, writing letters to voice their opinions. And it says the classroom should expose children to the effects of the real world, but in a controlled environment. Now, the issue with exposing the classroom to the effects, or exposing children to the effects of the real world, is that somebody gets to decide what the real world is. Here's the issue. The people that are deciding what the real world is under DEI Doug are people that are pushing woke cultural nonsense that is destructive to the very nation, the very foundation of what makes a country great. That is, we are all equal under God. We are all individuals, and we should all have the same opportunities to succeed, but we don't pit this group against that group. And at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but we are absolutely promoting victim ideology. Not that Canada hasn't had grotesque harms and wrongs to different people in its history, but if you did a culturally relevant study of world history, you would find that all countries were involved in heinous, grotesque acts, and is more a reflection on humanity. If you didn't think this DEI crap was political in nature, well, let me go through the Ontario Teachers Federation putting out their culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, putting out this module for teachers to helping students understand, quote, the following: the government budget, the impact of war, the meaning of national debt, unemployment data, proposed policies, minimum wage, the influence of advertising on children, levels of pollutants, racial profiling, crime stats, undercover stereotypes, interest rates and banking, loans, credit card debt, housing prices, cost of rental housing, climate change, global warming, pollution index, gas prices, budgeting, food insecurity, simulation of the global economy, inquiry into systemic equality, and it goes on to talk about politics of mathematical knowledge. Now, why are we talking about all these political things in any courses at any age group when the job of teachers is to simply teach facts, not opinions, not politics? And in fact, unless you're going into a political science degree, none of this should ever be discussed, and even then should always be discussed as an idea of the world and not passed as mere fact. Now, perhaps what I'm reading is directed at older students. It was unclear to me based on reading that module if it was. However, I found this one from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, again on the CRRP, that is pushed by DEI Doug. That is culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy educator checklist put out by the ETFO, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, and it goes through a variety of things very similar to what we just read. Examine examples used in teaching and resource materials. Are examples used which equally draw on the achievements and contributions? Again, here we are back to us versus them, victim versus oppressor, nonsense, woke ideology tearing down the fabric of Canada of both privileged and oppressed groups. That is, teaching children to look at everything through the lens of victim and oppressor. We know we need to decenter our whiteness. God forbid I was born in a white body. I guess now I have to bear the sins of every generation before me, even though it has nothing to do with me. But again, I'm not supposed to see it that way. I just don't understand because I don't have the victim. I'm not a victim. I'm not part of the oppressed group. So I'll never understand it. I have to decenter this whiteness and be culturally sensitive. At the end of the day, teach the basics. Teach English, teach math, teach science, teach the things that you are failing at teaching our children. You want to wonder why Canada's at where we're at? Why critical questions can't be asked? Perhaps it's because we're being told, like the Spider-Man meme, to point here, point there, point everywhere but at the problem, like DEI Doug. Like DEI Doug pushes, point everything everywhere, but never point it internally at the real problems. There is no us versus them. There is an elite group of politicians that don't give a damn about Canada. They don't represent the values of average everyday Canadians, and it shouldn't matter what color you are. We should all be equal. We should all treat each other with respect, and we should all be trying to lift each other up rather than tear each other down. All this DEI, Dougie garbage, diverse equity inclusion, all this does is tear at the fabric of society and teach children to tear down other children, and eventually they become adults being taught that it is okay to tear down other adults based on their background, something they can't control. That, my friends, even though they will teach you that only a dominant group can actually be racist, that is the very definition of racism. And DEI Doug pushes it all. Do not be fooled by the mainstream media telling you how Doug Ford is fighting against DEI. Look over here, don't look over here. Another classic magician trick by the mainstream media, trying to fool Canadians into believing that another elitist politician is actually fighting for you. You want to know how unconservative that is? Unbelievably unconservative. Conservatives conserve things. Canada is worth conserving. Now, Doug Ford, the same guy, Doug Ford, DEI Doug, this guy, well, look over here. Look at this. Don't look at all the other crap I'm pushing on your children and that I'm allowing. Because if I had a backbone, I would fight this tooth and nail. But DEI Doug doesn't care. Because he doesn't care about your children. He doesn't care about you. All he cares about is getting enough votes to get reelected so he can continue to enjoy the perks of the job. How unconservative is DEI Doug? Here we read from the Fraser Institute. Ontario government shovels out heaps of corporate welfare. October 24th, 2024. Is there any activity Premier Doug won't shove onto the backs of Ontario taxpayers? The article writes, based on the province's recently published 2023-24 public accounts, there likely isn't. The proof is in the detailed schedules of payment, which shows the government is willing to make taxpayers pay for anything and everything under the sun in the name of economic development. You see, Doug Ford doesn't care about you. He just cares about doing enough to get elected. And that means being Mr. DEI Doug and satisfying the woke lunatics that are in the education system rather than giving your children a proper education and fighting for the basics of the things they actually need to learn to be taught and the ideologies being left out. DEI Doug is more than happy to go along with the charade if it means he can get elected, because he's not conservative. He doesn't care. He just cares about getting elected. DEI Doug will do anything it takes, including corporate welfare. In 2023-2024, much corporate welfare went to automobile manufacturers. We know about that. But $80 million to General Motors, $28 million to Toyota, $20 million to Honda, $7 million to Chrysler. And on top of this, six-figure sums went to various other organizations in the auto sector, including parts manufacturers. Other corporate welfare handouts in the name of economic development was sugary foods. Ironic, given that the government is also in charge of healthcare. The article reads, taxpayers gave $4.5 million to the manufacturer of Maynard's wine gums, or Sour Patch Kids and other candies, $4.2 million to Dare Foods, $2.2 million to Ferrero Rocher, $1.9 million to a Fortune 500 company, that is PepsiCo, that is Frito-Lay and Pepsi, and $300,000 to Biscuits Liqueur. These are massive companies. They don't need your handouts, but DEI Doug doesn't care because he'll do whatever it takes to keep elected, including satisfying the people that are pulling the strings behind the scene. Now reading from MEI, Dear Ontario, corporate subsidies aren't the path to prosperity. This one took me back a little bit, but Ontario has spent an average of $9.1 billion a year in constant corporate handouts since 2018, all under DEI Doug Ford's watch. That's more than a 100% growth in corporate welfare in just a half decade. The most egregious example, it says, is $9.4 billion being given to Volkswagen Stellantis, and even more money was infused by the Trudeau government. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that DEI Doug is more than happy to go along with this absolute liberal nonsense because he's not a conservative. In fact, he stated that he absolutely loves former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
And everyone, I can assure you, all the premiers love Chrystia Freeland. I just love her a little more than the rest of the premiers.
And he stated it not once, not twice, but numerous times for all of Ontario and Canada to see how much he truly loves the Liberals and Liberal policies. Ironic if you've seen their new ad attacking Bonnie Crombie, talking about her being friends with Justin Trudeau, because he stated numerous times on the record how good of a friend he is with Chrystia Freeland.
Ontario. Now I'll hand it over to my very good friend, Deputy Premier Chrystia Freeland. Thank you.
And I quote, Doug Ford, February 10th, 2023 press conference. You want to talk about true leadership? Talk about the Deputy Prime Minister. I can assure you, all the premiers love Chrystia Freeland. I just love her a little bit more than the rest of the premiers. Oh, isn't that nice? DEI Doug loves a Liberal Deputy Prime Minister because they share the same values. So it's no surprise.
And everyone, I can assure you, all the premiers love Chrystia Freeland. I just love her a little more than the rest of the premiers.
And he continues, March 28th, 2022, in a press conference, I have a great relationship with Chrystia Freeland. She's wonderful. August 18th, 2020, I want to congratulate my friend, my good friend, Chrystia Freeland. She's just an amazing person. She's working around the clock, and now she's going to do finance. There's no one that would be better in that role than Chrystia Freeland. I absolutely love Chrystia Freeland. She's amazing. I'll have her back. August 18th, 2020. Now, you would think, is this just a one-way weird love relationship Doug has with the Liberal Deputy Prime Minister? No, DEI Doug and Chrystia Freeland, they fray-phrase. They best fray-phrase. They have a mutual love relationship. Chrystia Freeland on Doug Ford. I would certainly call him a friend, she said, February 2nd, 2024. I spoke to Doug Ford this morning, And I would even say how grateful I am for his friendship. We work very closely. August 7th, 2020.
So I do want to start by saying how grateful I am to Premier Ford for his close collaboration. I spoke to him this morning, and I would even say how grateful I am for his friendship.
April 3rd, 2020, Chrystia Freeland said about DEI Dougie that he's my therapist. Now, why are we surprised that Doug Ford is pushing diverse equity inclusion garbage on our children? Because he absolutely loves the Liberals. He absolutely loves corporate welfare. And he absolutely is more than willing to do whatever it takes to get reelected, including throwing your children's education under the bus to a woke ideology that seeks to do nothing more than divide our nation and tear down the foundation that made this country great. That is that we lift up individuals, we create an equal playing field for all peoples, and that we don't create us versus them mentalities, and we certainly don't promote them in the education system. I'm Greg Staley for Diverge Media, and DEI Doug is anything but conservative.